There's this moment people talk about when your life changes in an instant, like the air shifts, and nothing feels quite real anymore. For me, it happened the morning of our wedding. I woke up in the hotel room to sunlight slicing through the curtains, warming my face. My best man, Alex, was sprawled out on the pull-out couch, snoring like a chainsaw, empty beer cans scattered around him from the night before. I remember smiling, the kind of smile that fills your chest, knowing today was the day I'd marry the woman I loved more than anything in this world. The first sign something was off came when I checked my phone. Emma hadn't responded to the goodnight text I'd sent her. That wasn't like her. She was usually the type to send me cheesy emojis or even sneak in a voice note, telling me how much she couldn't wait to be my wife. But last night? Silence. I brushed it off. She was probably exhausted from the rehearsal dinner or caught up in all the last-minute chaos. Weddings are stressful, right? When I finally dragged myself out of bed and threw on a hoodie, I decided to go find her. I wanted to steal a few minutes before everything got crazy. Alex mumbled something about grabbing coffee, and I told him I'd be back soon. I didn't bother to text her, I figured surprising her would be romantic. She was staying in the suite down the hall with her bridesmaids, so I took the elevator up, still half asleep, imagining her reaction when she saw me standing there. The second sign hit me when her maid of honor, Rachel, answered the door, looking startled, almost guilty. She blocked the doorway like she didn't want me to come in. "Emma's not feeling well," she said quickly, her eyes darting behind her to the room. "Not feeling well?" I asked, confused. "What's wrong? Did she catch something?" Rachel hesitated, and in that split second, my stomach started to churn. She wasn't saying no outright, but something about the way she avoided my gaze sent a shiver up my spine. I pushed past her, muttering, "I just need to see her." I'll never forget the way Emma looked when I walked into that room. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing one of those silk robes I'd bought her as part of her bridal gift, but she wasn't glowing the way I thought she'd be. Her hair was a mess, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying all night. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Babe?" I said, my voice breaking with concern. "What's wrong?" She flinched, like my voice physically hurt her. Rachel shuffled uncomfortably behind me, whispering something to one of the other bridesmaids before leaving us alone. It was just Emma and me now, standing there in the deafening silence of that room. My heart was pounding, but I still had no idea why. "I need to tell you something," Emma finally said, her voice barely a whisper. Her hands were trembling as she fidgeted with the hem of her robe. That's when I noticed she wasn't wearing her engagement ring. My world started tilting. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I took a step toward her. "What do you mean? What's going on?" She looked up at me then, and I'll never forget the expression on her face. It was like she was carrying a weight so heavy it had crushed something inside her. "Last night," she started, her voice cracking, I made a mistake." It didn't sink in right away. I blinked at her, trying to process her words, but they didn't make sense. "A mistake?" I echoed. "What kind of mistake?" Her lip quivered, and tears started streaming down her face. I was frozen in place, dread washing over me like a cold wave. That's when she said it, the words that shattered me into pieces. "I slept with someone." I don't even know how long I stood there, staring at her, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Everything felt surreal, like I'd been ripped out of my body and was watching this happen to someone else. This wasn't my Emma. This wasn't the woman I was about to marry. She wasn't capable of this, was she? "Why?" was all I could manage to choke out. My voice sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. "Why would you do this to us?" "To me?" I couldn't even finish the sentence. The word marriage hung in the air like a cruel joke. She didn't answer right away, just sobbed into her hands. I waited, my fists clenched, my heart beating so loud I thought it might explode. When she finally looked up at me, her voice was raw, broken. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know why I did it. I freaked out. I thought, maybe I wasn't ready, or maybe I needed to." "To what?" I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. "To destroy everything we've built. To throw away the best thing that ever happened to you." Her sobs turned into gasps, and she reached for me, but I stepped back, my hands shaking. "Don't," I said, my voice cold now. "Don't touch me." I didn't even know what to feel in that moment, rage, heartbreak, disgust, all of it swirling inside me until I thought I might explode. This was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. How could she do this? How could she destroy us like this? And then the horrifying realization hit me like a punch to the gut. In a few hours, I was supposed to stand at an altar in front of everyone we loved and promise to spend the rest of my life with her. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked out of that room, leaving her sobbing on the bed. By the time I got back to my room, Alex was wide awake, scrolling through his phone. He looked up at me, grinning, ready to make some stupid joke about my last day of freedom. But when he saw my face, the grin disappeared instantly. "What happened?" he asked, his tone serious now. I opened my mouth to tell him, but the words wouldn't come. I just shook my head and sat down on the edge of the bed, burying my face in my hands. The weight of what had just happened was too much to bear. And the clock was still ticking. The wedding was in 6 hours. 6 hours. 6 hours to figure out how to breathe again. 6 hours to decide if I was about to marry the woman who had shattered me into 1,000 pieces. 6 hours to either bury this betrayal under layers of fake smiles and I-dos, or to blow up my entire life in front of everyone I knew. Alex sat across from me on the couch, his face a mix of concern and confusion as he tried to make sense of the bits and pieces I'd managed to choke out. I wasn't even sure what I'd said. I think I told him she cheated, but even saying the words out loud felt unreal. Like they didn't belong to me. "Wait, he said, holding up his hands. "She told you this? This morning? Like, right before the wedding?" I nodded, staring blankly at the carpet beneath my feet. It was this ugly, patterned thing, the kind of hotel carpeting that looked like it was made to hide stains. I'd been staring at it so long I'd memorized the shapes. It was easier than looking at Alex, or thinking about Emma. "Dude," he said softly, leaning forward. "What are you going to do?" The question hit me like a slap. What was I going to do? I hadn't let myself think that far yet. My brain felt like it was moving in slow motion, like I was trying to run underwater. All I could focus on was the raw ache in my chest, the sharp pain every time I thought about her in someone else's arms. I imagined her laughing, touching, kissing. God, I couldn't even finish the thought without wanting to throw up. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "I don't know." Alex frowned, his jaw tightening. He was pissed. Not at me, at her. I could see it in the way he clenched his fists, the way he kept shaking his head like he couldn't believe it. He'd been my best friend since college, the guy who'd been there through every breakup, every heartbreak. He was the one who'd convinced me to ask Emma out in the first place, swearing she was different. "She's the one, man," he'd said after meeting her for the first time. And I'd believed him. "What did she say?" he asked after a moment, his voice quieter now. "Like, why?" I let out a bitter laugh, the sound foreign even to me. "She doesn't know," I said, my hands balling into fists on my lap. "She said she freaked out. That she wasn't sure if she was ready." "So, what?" "She thought sleeping with some random asshole was the way to figure that out." Alex grimaced. "Jesus." I stood up then, pacing the room like a caged animal. My head was spinning, and the walls felt like they were closing in. "I don't get it," I said, my voice rising. "We've been together for 5 years. 5 fucking years, Alex. We built a life together. We planned this whole damn wedding. And she throws it all away the night before, for what? For one last. I don't even know what to call it. A fling? A test run?" I stopped, staring out the window at the parking lot below. A group of kids was running around, laughing, their parents chasing after them with smiles on their faces. I felt so far removed from that world, like I was trapped in some alternate reality where everything I thought I knew was a lie. "I loved her," I said softly, the words catching in my throat. "I still love her." That was the worst part. Even after everything, I still loved her. I didn't know how to stop. My heart hadn't caught up to my brain yet, still clinging to the version of her I thought I knew. The version of her who would never, ever hurt me like this. Alex stood up, walking over to me. "You don't have to do this, you know," he said, his voice steady. "The wedding, I mean. If you need to call it off, we'll figure it out. You've got people who'll back you up. Your family, your friends, me. No one's going to blame you for walking away." Walking away. The idea felt so simple when he said it, but the reality was anything but. Calling off the wedding meant telling my parents, my siblings, her parents, the 100 or so guests who were probably already on their way. It meant explaining why, reliving this nightmare over and over again until everyone had dissected it, judged us. And then there was the fallout, returning the gifts, canceling the honeymoon, dealing with the whispers and rumors that would follow us both for months, maybe years. But what was the alternative? Pretend this never happened? Stand up there at the altar, look her in the eyes, and vow to love and honor her for the rest of my life while this secret sat between us like a ticking time bomb? Could I even look at her without seeing his hands on her? His body next to hers? I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't know if I could do any of it. The minutes ticked by, and soon Alex's phone buzzed with a text from someone downstairs. "They're starting to set up," he said, glancing at me carefully. "We've got about 4 hours now." 4 hours. The clock was speeding up, and I still had no idea what to do. My heart and my head were at war, pulling me in opposite directions. Every time I thought about canceling, I felt sick, like I was ripping out a part of myself. But the idea of going through with it made me feel even worse. How could I marry someone who didn't respect me enough to stay faithful? Who didn't love me enough to stop herself from destroying everything we had? I sat back down on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor again. My mind was a hurricane of anger, heartbreak, and confusion, but one thought kept rising above the chaos: I needed to talk to her again. "I'm going to her room," I said suddenly, standing up. Alex looked surprised but didn't try to stop me. "I need answers. I need to know. I don't know. I just need to hear her say something that makes this make sense." Alex nodded, his expression hard. "Do what you need to do, man. But if she doesn't give you the answer you're looking for, you walk. Don't let her guilt you into staying." I didn't respond. I just grabbed my jacket, walked out the door, and headed for the elevator. My heart was pounding the whole way up, each ding of the elevator bringing me closer to the woman who had wrecked me. When I reached her door, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the handle, my pulse racing. Part of me wanted to turn around, to avoid the confrontation altogether. But I couldn't. I had to face her. I had to know if there was anything left to salvage, or if this was the end. Taking a deep breath, I knocked. When she opened the door, Emma looked like a ghost of the woman I thought I knew. Her eyes were swollen and bloodshot, her hair still messy from the morning. She hadn't even changed out of that silk robe. For a moment, I just stared at her, at the woman I had spent 5 years building a life with. She used to be my safe place, the one I could turn to when the world felt like too much. Now, standing in front of her, all I felt was anger, confusion, and this gaping hollow inside me where trust used to live. "Can I come in?" I asked. My voice sounded dead, even to me. She nodded without a word, stepping aside to let me in. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, that sweet vanilla scent I used to love. Now it felt cloying, suffocating. I stood awkwardly near the door as she sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting together in her lap. She didn't look at me. "Say something," I said finally, breaking the silence. I didn't even know what I wanted her to say. I just needed her to fill the space with something other than my own racing thoughts. "I don't know where to start," she said quietly. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. Good. She should cry. She should feel every ounce of the pain she'd dumped on me. "How about the truth?" I snapped, my voice harsher than I intended. I was losing control, and I didn't care. "How about you tell me why the hell you decided to ruin everything we've been building for 5 years? Why, the night before our wedding, you thought it was a good idea to—" I couldn't even say it. The words felt like poison in my mouth. She flinched, like my anger physically hurt her. "I don't have an excuse," she said softly. I can't sit here and try to justify what I did. I messed up. I made the worst mistake of my life, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." "That's not good enough," I said, my hands clenching into fists. "You don't just get to say, 'Oops, my bad,' and move on like nothing happened. I need to know why, Emma. Why did you do it? Why now, of all times?" She looked up at me then, her eyes brimming with tears. "I was scared," she said, her voice trembling. "I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's the truth. Last night, after the rehearsal dinner, I started thinking about everything. About the wedding, about forever, about whether I was ready for it. I felt trapped. Like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and I didn't know if I could jump." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Trapped?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "You felt trapped? By what? Me? Our relationship? Because I never forced you into this, Emma. If you weren't ready, you could have told me. We could have postponed, talked it through. But instead, I had to stop. My throat was too tight to keep going." She wiped at her tears with shaking hands. "I wasn't thinking straight," she said. "I know that doesn't excuse it, but I wasn't in my right mind. I went down to the bar to clear my head, and I ran into this guy. I didn't know him. He was just there. And I don't know what came over me. It was like I was trying to sabotage myself, to see how far I could push before everything fell apart." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly, laughing without humor. "Mission accomplished." Her sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands. I stood there, watching her cry, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I thought about her in that bar, making the choice to betray me, and the sympathy evaporated, replaced by cold, hard anger. "So, what?" I asked, my voice steady but icy. "You had your last hurrah, got your little test out of the way, and now what? You expect me to just go through with the wedding like none of this happened?" She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I don't expect anything," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve you. I know I've destroyed everything we had, and if you decide to walk away, I'll accept that. But I swear to you, it meant nothing. He meant nothing. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life making this up to you, if you'll let me." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy and desperate. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was just some momentary lapse, that we could somehow put the pieces back together. But how could I trust her again? How could I ever look at her without seeing this betrayal, this gaping wound she'd left in me? Do you even understand what you've done? I asked quietly. My voice was calm now, but underneath, I was shaking. You didn't just cheat, Emma. You took everything we had, all the love, the trust, the future we were building, and you threw it away. You broke us. She started crying again, harder this time, her whole body shaking with sobs. I'm sorry, she whispered over and over again, like it was some kind of mantra. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? I wanted to scream, to cry, to smash something just to feel anything other than this suffocating numbness. But instead, I just stood there, the silence stretching out between us like an unbridgeable chasm. Finally, I spoke. I need time. Her head shot up, hope flickering in her tear-streaked eyes. Of course, she said quickly. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes. I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything else. Then I turned and walked out the door, leaving her behind in that room with her regret and her apologies. I didn't look back. By the time I made it back to my room, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. Alex was still there, pacing the floor, but when he saw me, he stopped. Well? He asked cautiously. I didn't answer him. I just sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, the weight of everything crashing down on me. The wedding was in 3 hours. 3 hours. 3 hours until everyone we loved would be sitting in that chapel, dressed in their finest, waiting for me to walk out and marry the woman who had betrayed me less than 12 hours ago. 3 hours to decide whether I could forgive her, whether I could move forward, or whether I needed to burn it all down. I couldn't sit in the hotel room any longer. Alex tried to talk to me, he kept saying things like, you don't owe her anything, man, and, you can't let her guilt you into this, but I barely heard him. His voice was muffled, distant, like he was talking to me through a wall of water. My mind was too loud, screaming over everything else. I told Alex I needed some air, and he offered to come with me, but I shook my head. I just need to be alone for a bit, I said. He didn't push. He just nodded, his jaw tight, and watched as I walked out the door. The hotel lobby was a blur as I passed through it. The same staff who had greeted us so warmly when we'd checked in earlier in the week now felt like strangers. Did they know? Could they tell that the guy standing in front of them was a man whose life had been gutted overnight? I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact, and walked outside into the crisp autumn air. The parking lot was mostly empty. A few guests were loading their luggage into cars, smiling and chatting, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. I kept walking until I found myself at the edge of a small garden tucked behind the hotel. It was quiet, secluded, the kind of place where people came to take wedding photos. How ironic. I sat down on a wooden bench, my hands shaking as I buried my face in them. The gravity of the situation hit me all at once, like a weight pressing down on my chest. My mind spun in endless circles, replaying every moment of the past 5 years, our first date, the night I proposed, the way she'd looked at me during the rehearsal dinner just hours before she destroyed us. Was it all a lie? Or was she telling the truth when she said she loved me, that it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything? I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But how could I? How could I trust her again after this? Trust wasn't just something you could snap your fingers and rebuild. It was earned, piece by piece, over time. And she had demolished it in one night. I pulled out my phone, scrolling mindlessly through the photos I'd taken over the years. There we were on vacation in Italy, smiling in front of the Colosseum. There she was laughing at some dumb joke I'd made while we were hiking last summer. There was the selfie we'd taken the day we got engaged, her face lit up with joy as she held out her hand to show off the ring. The ring. I clenched my jaw, the image of her bare finger flashing in my mind. She hadn't been wearing it this morning. I didn't know if she'd taken it off before or after what she'd done, but the thought of her removing it, of making that conscious decision, made me feel physically ill. That ring had meant something to me. To us. It was supposed to be a promise, a symbol of the life we were building together. And now it just felt hollow. My phone buzzed in my hand, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from my mom. "Hi sweetheart. Just checking in. Everything okay? Can't wait to see you at the chapel. Love you." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. My parents were so excited about this wedding. They adored Emma. My mom had practically adopted her as a second daughter, and my dad had told me more than once how lucky I was to have found someone like her. They'd flown in from out of state, spent weeks helping us plan, poured so much love and effort into making this day special. And now I had to decide whether to tear it all apart. The weight of that choice was suffocating. It wasn't just about me and Emma anymore. It was about everyone else, our families, our friends, the people who had traveled miles to celebrate us. If I called off the wedding, I'd be hurting them, too. I'd be turning their joy into confusion, their excitement into disappointment. But what was the alternative? Pretend everything was fine. Smile for the cameras, say the vows, and carry this secret into our marriage like a ticking time bomb? I knew myself. I wasn't the kind of man who could just let something like this go. Even if I wanted to, even if I said the words, the betrayal would fester inside me, poisoning everything. It would come out eventually, in arguments, in resentment, in moments of weakness when I'd wonder if she was lying to me again. I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to live like that. I leaned back on the bench, staring up at the sky. The clouds were thick, gray, threatening rain. It felt fitting, somehow, like the universe was reflecting the chaos inside me. For the first time in hours, I let myself cry. Not loud, ugly sobs like hers, but quiet tears that rolled down my face as I sat there, feeling the full weight of everything I'd lost. I cried for the version of her I thought I knew, the woman I'd trusted with my whole heart. I cried for the future we'd planned, for the house we'd talked about buying, the kids we dreamed of having. I cried for the man I used to be, the one who believed in her so completely that he never saw this coming. When the tears finally stopped, I felt hollow. Empty. But in that emptiness, a thought began to take shape, one that had been lurking in the back of my mind all day but that I hadn't wanted to face until now. I couldn't marry her. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, but it was the truth. I couldn't stand in front of all those people and say vows I didn't mean. I couldn't promise to forgive her when I wasn't even sure I could look at her without feeling this crushing sense of betrayal. I couldn't start a marriage on a foundation that was already cracked beyond repair. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how I was going to face everyone, how I was going to explain this, how I was going to move forward from here. But I knew one thing for certain, I couldn't go through with the wedding. I stood up, wiping my face with the sleeve of my jacket, and started walking back toward the hotel. The clock was ticking, but my mind was clearer now. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew I had to do this. For myself. For my sanity. For whatever future I still had left. When I got back to the room, Alex looked up at me, his expression cautious. "Well?" he asked. I met his gaze, my voice steady for the first time all day. "I'm calling it off." The room was quiet when I said it, but my words seemed to echo, bouncing off the walls, hanging heavy in the air. Alex stood there for a moment, processing what I'd just said. Then he nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly, like he'd been bracing himself for the possibility. "Okay," he said. "What do you need me to do?" I didn't even know how to answer that. My brain felt like it had been through a blender. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I need to tell someone. Her. My parents. The guests. I stopped, overwhelmed just thinking about it. God, I don't even know where to start. Alex walked over and put a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. One step at a time, he said. You don't have to figure it all out right now. First, let's get her. This conversation isn't just on you, it's on her too. She needs to face this, not just leave you holding the bag. I nodded, grateful for his support. I didn't trust myself to do this alone. The idea of seeing her again, of sitting her down and telling her it was over, felt like trying to move a mountain with my bare hands. But he was right, this wasn't just my burden to carry. She had created this mess, and she didn't get to avoid the fallout. I grabbed my jacket and followed Alex out of the room, my heart pounding with every step. The walk to her suite felt endless, the hallway stretching out in front of me like a tunnel. When we reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. Alex gave me a small nod, and I took a deep breath before opening the door. Emma was sitting in the same spot I'd left her, still in that damn silk robe, her face pale and blotchy from crying. When she saw me, she stood up quickly, her eyes wide with hope. Did you? No, I said sharply, cutting her off. I didn't change my mind. Her face crumpled, and she sat back down, her hands clutching the edge of the bed like it was the only thing holding her upright. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please, we can work through this. We can fix it. I'll do whatever it takes. I shook my head, my chest tightening. No, Emma. We can't. I've spent the whole morning trying to make sense of this, trying to figure out if there's any way to move forward, and there's not. You broke something that can't be fixed. Her tears started again, falling in silent streaks down her face. I didn't look away this time. I needed her to see that I meant every word. I can't marry you, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Not after this. Not when I know I'll never be able to trust you again. I'll earn it back, she said desperately, her voice rising. I'll prove to you that this was a mistake, that it'll never happen again. I love you, please don't throw this away. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound cutting through the room. You're the one who threw it away, Emma. Not me. You had every chance to talk to me, to tell me you were scared, to be honest about how you were feeling. But instead, you went to someone else. You made the choice to destroy us. Her sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly snuffed out by the memory of her bare hand, her robe, the words she'd said to me that morning. I couldn't go back to the man I was before this. I couldn't unknow what she'd done. Alex cleared his throat, stepping forward slightly. We need to start letting people know, he said gently but firmly. Your parents, her parents, the wedding planner. It's going to be a mess, but it's better to rip off the band-aid now than wait until everyone's already at the chapel. Emma looked up, her tear-streaked face full of panic. No, she said quickly. Please, can we just? Can we wait? Can we talk about this more, just the two of us? Maybe tomorrow, when we're both calmer, we can figure out. No, I said firmly, cutting her off. There's nothing to figure out. It's over. The words felt final, heavy, but also strangely freeing. Saying them out loud solidified the choice I'd already made in my heart. It wasn't the future I'd envisioned, but it was the only way forward. We started with her parents. She called them from the suite while Alex and I waited just outside the door. I didn't hear what she said, but when she came out, her face was pale, and her hands were shaking. They're upset, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They don't understand. I don't care if they understand, I said coldly. This isn't about them. Next, I called my parents. My mom cried when I told her, her voice breaking as she asked me if I was okay, if I needed her to come over. My dad was quieter, but I could hear the anger in his voice. He didn't press for details, just said, "We'll be there for you, no matter what." The hardest part was telling the wedding planner. She'd been so excited, so invested in making everything perfect, and now I was pulling the rug out from under her at the last minute. She didn't say much, just a curt "understood," before hanging up. After that, it was a blur. Alex helped coordinate with the hotel staff to stop the ceremony setup, while I worked with Emma to draft a brief message to send to the guests. We kept it vague, due to unforeseen circumstances. The wedding has been cancelled, but I knew the rumors would start flying as soon as people found out. It didn't matter. Let them talk. The truth was messy, but at least it was mine. By the time the chapel was cleared, and the guests started receiving their messages, it was early evening. The day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life had turned into a living nightmare, but at least it was over. I went back to my room, locking the door behind me. Alex offered to stay, but I told him I needed to be alone. He gave me a long hug before leaving, telling me he was just a phone call away if I needed him. And then, for the first time all day, I let myself breathe. Really breathe. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how I was going to move forward, or how long it would take to heal from this. But as I sat there in the silence of that hotel room, staring out the window at the setting sun, I felt a strange sense of relief. I'd made the hardest decision of my life, but it was the right one. I didn't know who I was without her, but maybe that was the point. Maybe this was the beginning of figuring that out. And maybe, just maybe, I'd be okay.